Now, in this topic, okay, we'll start with jaundice or bilirubin metabolism. We'll talk about different types of jaundice because this is very important lecture for you. Then we move on to the different pathological aspect. Now see here. So everybody know what is jaundice. Okay, jaundice is a yellow discoloration of skin and sclera. Okay, skin and sclera or even mucous membrane you can add there, and this occurs when systemic retention of bilirubin produces serum level above 2 milligram per deciliter. In the normal people, it should be below 1.2, or some of the textbook even mention below 1. Below 1, it is easier for you to remember. So jaundice is known as hyperbilirubinemia. Hyperbilirubinemia means excessive bilirubin deposition either in the blood, okay, or in the subcutaneous tissue. Now, what is the normal level? Less than 1. If it is more than 2, then it is jaundice. And this jaundice will cause yellow discoloration of skin and mucous membrane as well as sclera. Another important term there is called cholestasis. Okay, cholestasis. Now, cholestasis means, isn't it? Stasis is obstruction. Chole means bile. That means bile is not flowing there. Bile is not flowing properly. So there is some obstruction which is hampering the bile flow. That obstruction can occur in the common bile duct, okay, which is the biggest of the bile duct, or it can also occur inside the liver in those very small biliary canaliculi. So anything is called cholestatic jaundice. Now with this, we are going to repeat this so many times, okay, in the coming lecture. Let's start with the bilirubin metabolism. Now how bilirubin is synthesized, what happens to the bilirubin inside the liver, and what is the next step after that, and how bilirubin is excreted, everything. Now, bilirubin is the end product of heme degradation. So when RBC, okay, is destroyed or damaged, then hemoglobin will be released. That hemoglobin is made up of heme as well as globin. Okay, so that heme component of hemoglobin will undergo into bilirubin pathway. So most of the daily production, 0.2 to 0.3 gram, is derived from breakdown of AZ red cell within mononuclear phagocyte, and the remainder is derived from the turnover of hepatic hemoprotein like cytochrome P450 and catalase. You don't need to know in this much detail. Actually, if somebody asks you what is the source of bilirubin, okay, from where bilirubin is synthesized, you can simply say from the red blood cells, and we understand what are you talking about. Okay, heme component of hemoglobin that is present inside the RBC. Now the normal life cycle of RBC is up to 120 days. So after that, all RBC would be destroyed inside the spleen or inside the reticuloendothelial system. Now after that, bilirubin will be formed. This is one way. And another one, when somehow when these RBC are dying earlier than the expected, like hemolysis or hemolytic anemia, then more bilirubin will be synthesized. Okay. Now, one small point is there are some other source of bilirubin as well, and these are cytochrome P450 and catalase. Now sometimes in disease known as thalassemia, okay, and megaloblastic anemia, inside the bone marrow itself, okay, inside the bone marrow itself, the young RBC are synthesized and getting dead. They are synthesized and getting dead before they come out to the blood. This is known as ineffective erythropoiesis. Ineffective erythropoiesis. Erythropoiesis means synthesis of RBC. Okay, this process is faulty or ineffective here. That's why even before they get matured, they die. And that is one of the important cause of jaundice in this type of situation. And an example of ineffective erythropoiesis are thalassemia. Never forget this. Even in megaloblastic anemia, that can happen. Now, the enzyme which is involved in this bilirubin metabolism are heme oxygenase and biliverdin reductase. Heme oxygenase oxidizes heme to biliverdin, and then that biliverdin will be converted into bilirubin by biliverdin reductase. Sometimes some biochemical teacher, okay, may ask this type of question to you. So it is nice to remember this. Now bilirubin is formed now. This bilirubin is released into the blood. This bilirubin is known as unconjugated bilirubin, okay, because till now conjugation has not occurred. This bilirubin will bind with albumin and it will travel in the blood. Now this albumin bilirubin complex will travel towards the liver. When it reaches the hepatocyte, okay, that complex will dissociate again and only bilirubin will enter into the hepatocyte, whereas albumin is left behind. This is important point. Albumin doesn't enter into the hepatocyte, okay? Only bilirubin will enter. Now remember, it is still unconjugated bilirubin. Now, what happens? Let me explain this first, and then we'll look different flow chart, and then it will be very easy for you. Now, inside the hepatocyte, okay, there is one important enzyme, and the name of that enzyme is glucuronide transferase. Glucuronide transferase, also known as UDP, glucuronide transferase. It will cause conjugation reaction and change that unconjugated bilirubin into the conjugated variety. Now, this conjugated bilirubin is water soluble now. Okay, it is water soluble, and it will be excreted into the bile. Now, with the help of biliary duct, this bile will go towards the second part of the duodenum. Now, what will happen there? That bile will flow towards the distal parts of the intestine. Now, there are lots of bacteria inside our intestine, and these bacteria have got one particular enzyme which is known as beta glucuronidase. This glucuronidase will degrade that conjugated bilirubin, okay, into unconjugated, okay, as well as urobilinogen. Now, okay, I forgot to explain one more step here. After conjugation, these are called bilirubin monoglucuronide and bilirubin diglucuronide. This is also important here. And this bacterial enzyme will degrade those bigger molecule of bilirubin into a smaller one as well. Now, what will happen to this urobilinogen? Now, see here, there is one very important step which is happening, that is called enterohepatic circulation. Enterohepatic circulation. Especially this unconjugated bile acid or bilirubin is reabsorbed into the ileum and returned to the liver by enterohepatic circulation, and again the same cycle will repeat. It is just like one circle there. At the same time, the urobilinogen, okay, urobilinogen will go distal towards the colon and it will convert into stercobilin, and that stercobilin will be excreted into the stool. Now, the natural color of the stool is because of that stercobilin, and stercobilin is coming from urobilinogen, okay, and most of the urobilinogen can be excreted and then reabsorbed into the blood and then excreted into the urine as well. Now let's discuss this with the help of flow chart. It will be easier for you to understand. See here, Now, these are the erythrocytes, okay, old erythrocytes. From their heme has come out. This heme will develop into bilirubin. Okay, first is biliverdin, then bilirubin. Heme oxygenase enzyme from biliverdin. Okay, biliverdin reductase from bilirubin. Now, this everything is happening inside the reticuloendothelial system. Now, I'm sure you all know the meaning of reticuloendothelial system, that is called macrophages. Okay, macrophages, especially occurring in the spleen. Now, bilirubin will combine with albumin and travel in the blood. When it reaches the liver, only bilirubin will enter inside. Albumin will be left behind in the blood. Now, inside the hepatocyte of liver, there will be conjugation reaction. Okay, that conjugation reaction will form bilirubin monoglucuronide and bilirubin diglucuronide. After that, they become water soluble and excreted in the bile. Now, through the bile duct, they're coming into the second part of the duodenum. Okay, second part of the duodenum, and all other reaction occur in this intestine now. Okay, because of this bacterial enzyme, which are known as beta glucuronidase. Now, the bigger conjugated bilirubin will be degraded again into a smaller one. Some of them will be converted into unconjugated bilirubin as well, which are absorbed, and then they undergo into enterohepatic circulation. Now, rest of the bilirubin will be converted into urobilinogen. Now, this urobilinogen will convert it into stercobilinogen and stercobilin, and some of them is excreted in the stool, which will give natural color to the stool, and some of the urobilinogen will be reabsorbed and go into the blood again and then excreted in the urine. That's why urobilinogen. Uro means urine. So this is one of the very important point. Now, this is another way, okay, this is another way of explaining. It is even easier for you. So let me go through it now. See here, this is the blood vessel. Okay, this is the blood vessel. Now, RBC has a life cycle of 120 days. After that, they will be degraded or destroyed inside the spleen. We already know that point. But sometimes what happens, in case of hemolysis or hemolytic anemia, they are getting destroyed earlier. That can happen inside the blood vessel, which is intravascular, or outside the blood vessel, or extravascular. That means in the spleen. If it occurs in the spleen, it is called extravascular. Very easy. What happened? Unconjugated bilirubin is formed, bind with albumin, okay, enter into the liver. This is hepatocyte, liver. Now, unconjugated bilirubin will be conjugated there. And UDP, glucuronyl transferase, is the important enzyme which is doing this reaction. Okay. Now, there is ligandin or G protein and all those things. That is not very important. After the conjugation, it is excreted into the biliary system or biliary channel, you can say. Okay, these are biliary canaliculi in the beginning. Many biliary channel or canaliculi will fuse together to form bigger type of biliary duct, and ultimately from the liver, two hepatic duct would come out. That is right hepatic duct and left hepatic duct. They combine together to form common hepatic duct, and when cystic duct combines with common hepatic duct, then only we call it common bile duct or bile duct. Okay, so ultimately through the bile duct, the bile with bilirubin flows into the duodenum. Remember, this is conjugated bilirubin. Now, this conjugated bilirubin will be degraded by bacterial protease. Okay, bacterial protease. The different name they have been given in different textbook. Then some of the conjugated bilirubin will be converted into unconjugated, and some other will be converted into urobilinogen. See here, majority of that is excreted in the fecal matter, and less amount is reabsorbed again into the portal circulation, and then it is excreted into the urine. Okay, it is excreted into the urine. This is the complete metabolism of bilirubin. Now, some questions for you. Okay, so listen very carefully. If you understand it here, later on, all different types of jaundice are very, very easy to understand. If there is excessive hemolysis occurring in this stage, excessive hemolysis, more RBCs are, breaking down, more bilirubin is formed. Now that more bilirubin probably cannot be handled by the liver. Okay, so in this situation, unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia occurs. This is important point. That's why in hemolytic anemia, the type of bilirubin is unconjugated one. Whereas in liver disease, now we are talking about this hepatocyte, this is liver. So in liver disease, okay, both unconjugated as well as conjugated bilirubin would be higher. Whereas in obstructive jaundice or post-hepatic jaundice, okay, by this time bilirubin is already conjugated. So if any obstruction occurs in this biliary duct or canaliculi, only conjugated bilirubin will be higher. So this is the take-home message from bilirubin metabolism. Now, I'm not going to discuss this, okay? This is shown in some other way, but the meaning is still the same. Meaning is same here. Now, with this understanding, let's move further. Let's talk about cholestasis. Now, cholestasis means impaired bile flow because of some obstruction. Impaired bile flow because of obstruction. Now, that obstruction can occur inside the liver or outside the liver. If it occurs inside the liver, we call it intrahepatic obstruction, and if it occurs outside, extrahepatic obstruction. Quite an easy type of terms. Now, what are the problems of cholestasis? Pruritus is the main presenting symptom sometimes in the patient. Now, pruritus, though the exact pathogenesis is obscure, we have certain hypotheses here. This conjugated bilirubin, okay, conjugated bilirubin gets deposited in the subcutaneous tissue or on the skin in this case, and that can cause pruritus, means itching. So a patient who came to the hospital with very yellow eye and a lot of scratch marks on the skin. Remember, if your examiner asks which type of jaundice is this, without hesitation say it has a high possibility of obstructive jaundice because of the scratch marks as well as deep jaundice. Skin xanthoma, which are focal collection of cholesterol and the lipid, sometimes appear in cholestatic jaundice, and this is as a result of hyperlipidemia and impaired excretion of cholesterol. Hyperlipidemia commonly occur in case of obstructive jaundice. So if hyperlipidemia occurs, this lipid can deposit here and there in different parts of the body. Okay, so if they deposit in the tendon, if they get deposit in the tendon, we call it xanthoma. Xanthoma. And one more point, I'm going to write it here for you. If they get deposited in the soft tissue, the other types of soft tissue, for example, in the eyelid, okay, upper eyelid, we call it xanthelasma. Xanthelasma. Xanthelasma is upper eyelid, one of the tissue. It can occur in other place also, but in the soft tissue we call it xanthelasma. In the tendon we call it xanthoma. This is the deposition of the lipid. A characteristic lab finding in case of cholestasis is alkaline phosphatase would be elevated, because this alkaline phosphatase is mainly present in the canalicular membrane of hepatocyte. Means they are present in the biliary canaliculi or biliary channel. So it is ALP. Okay, ALP is the name of the enzyme, alkaline phosphatase. Don't forget that. Okay, so let's continue. We are talking about cholestasis. Now, before the break, I explained about what happens in cholestasis. There is obstruction of bile flow that can happen inside the liver or outside the liver. That's the first thing. Second, pruritus is one of the main presenting complaint or symptom in case of cholestatic jaundice. Cholestatic jaundice is another term for obstructive jaundice. Because of excessive lipid, mainly cholesterol, there is hypercholesterolemia because cholesterol cannot be excreted in the bile and it will retain in the blood, which can result in formation of xanthoma or xanthelasma. One of the important liver function test finding is raised alkaline phosphatase. Raised alkaline phosphatase or ALP. I will talk about that again. And because of long-term obstruction of the bile, okay, long-term obstruction of the bile, fat cannot be absorbed. Okay, fat absorption need bile. The bile salt should form micelle. Okay, then that micelle will be incorporated into chylomicron. That's how fat is absorbed from the intestine. So without bile, this process cannot occur. So even fat soluble vitamin cannot be absorbed, and fat soluble vitamins are vitamin A, D, E and K. So there will be deficiency of this vitamin in case of long-term obstructive jaundice. Don't forget that it is connected with, okay, because connected with fat malabsorption. Now with this information, let's talk about the causes of jaundice, and we roughly divide them into different headings like congenital and acquired. Congenital means from the time of birth. Okay, the problem has occurred from the time of birth. Gilbert syndrome, Crigler-Najjar syndrome, Dubin-Johnson syndrome, and Rotor syndrome. These are the few names. Now, Gilbert syndrome is the most mildest among them all. Okay, in this condition, the enzyme glucuronide transferase is slightly inactive. So it can lead to slight jaundice only. That is Gilbert syndrome. Crigler-Najjar is a serious type of disorder where that enzyme is either absent or very decreased. Okay, so Crigler-Najjar 1 and Crigler-Najjar 2, there are two varieties. Dubin-Johnson syndrome and Rotor syndrome are the example of conjugated hyperbilirubinemia, whereas Gilbert and Crigler-Najjar are unconjugated one. Now, regarding the acquired causes of jaundice, they are again divided into three headings: prehepatic, hepatic, and posthepatic. Prehepatic is hemolytic jaundice. Another term is hemolytic jaundice. Hepatic is hepatocellular jaundice. A lot of disease of the liver, okay, are the example here. And post-hepatic is obstructive jaundice, mainly the problem of biliary duct. Let's move on. Now, this is the other way of answering the causes of jaundice. Predominantly unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia and predominantly conjugated hyperbilirubinemia. Now, what are the causes? See here, if there is excessive production of bilirubin, then naturally there is unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia, excessive production, and that can occur in hemolytic anemia. Now, can you give me some of the example of hemolytic anemia? Yes?
G6PD deficiency, sickle cell anemia, PNH, thalassemia, and hereditary spherocytosis.
Excellent. Wonderful. Okay. So most of the name he has already told. Very good. So let me repeat them again. G6PD deficiency, very good. Sickle cell anemia, thalassemia, okay, hereditary spherocytosis, autoimmune hemolytic anemia, these are some other, and even paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. So this is a very common question in the Viva exam. So please be prepared. What are the example of hemolytic anemia? In all these hemolytic anemia, there is production of excessive bilirubin, and that is unconjugated type. Another one, resorption of blood from internal hemorrhage area. Like anyhow, okay, there is hemorrhage or blood clot present inside the body, and that is a source of bilirubin now, because RBC is there, hemoglobin is there, so from there also bilirubin will be synthesized. Any example you can take, like GI bleeding or alimentary tract bleeding, any hematoma inside the body. Hematoma means blood clot, even in the cranial cavity, even in thoracic cavity or abdominal cavity, wherever. Another is ineffective erythropoiesis. Just now before the break I talked about this. This is synthesis of RBC, but those RBCs are killed or they are dying too quickly even before they come out into the peripheral circulation, and this is called ineffective erythropoiesis. Some important example are thalassemia and megaloblastic anemia. Another important heading here is reduced hepatic uptake. The bilirubin is there, but if liver fails to take that bilirubin inside the hepatocyte, then also unconjugated hyperbilirubinemia will occur, and this occurs in viral or drug-induced hepatitis and even cirrhosis of the liver. The third one is impaired bilirubin conjugation. Something wrong with that enzyme, so that enzyme cannot convert unconjugated bilirubin into the conjugated variety. And a wonderful example is physiological jaundice of the newborn, because that enzyme is yet not very mature. Okay, after having this concept, let's move on to the predominantly conjugated type of hyperbilirubinemia. Now see there. Now this again can be discussed in two headings: decreased hepatocellular excretion and impaired intra or extrahepatic bile flow. Now, decreased hepatocellular excretion occurs in this situation: deficiency in canalicular membrane transporter, drug-induced canalicular membrane dysfunction. These canaliculi are the biliary canaliculi we are talking about now, that can be done by oral contraceptive pills or cyclosporine. This is OCP. Okay? It's a type of contraception which is used by female. It has the estrogen and progesterone, and cyclosporine is immunosuppressive drug. Sometimes hepatocellular damage or toxicity, which is caused by viral or drug-induced hepatitis, can also lead to decreased hepatocellular excretion. Now listen carefully. So what will happen here is, okay, probably these hepatocytes are swollen, okay, because of the inflammation, and these biliary canaliculi are present in between this hepatocyte. So this hepatocyte will pressurize or compress this small biliary duct, so that there will be obstruction. This is the way you should remember. Similar type of mechanisms are explained here now. Impaired intra or extrahepatic bile flow. It can be seen in primary biliary cirrhosis, primary sclerosing cholangitis, gallstone, or carcinoma of the head of the pancreas. Now, to explain it in a better way, I want you to remember the pathway of bile flow. Okay, pathway of bile flow. Now, all of you, please listen here. The bile is synthesized by liver, and that bile is picked by biliary canaliculi, which are present in between the hepatocyte. Now, ultimately, all these small biliary canaliculi will fuse together and form larger and larger biliary channel. And when they come out of the liver, they come out in two big ducts only, right hepatic duct and left hepatic duct. They also combine together to form common hepatic duct, and this common hepatic duct, okay, when it is fused with cystic duct, we call it common bile duct. Now, this common bile duct will go and open into the second part of the duodenum. So this is the complete pathway from the liver till the intestine. Now, anywhere, if there is obstruction or blockage anywhere in this pathway, okay, conjugated hyperbilirubinemia will occur. If you remember like that, the concept is quite clear. Now let's come back to the diseases here. Primary biliary cirrhosis mainly affect those bile duct which are present inside the liver. Those smaller biliary duct are affected in primary biliary cirrhosis. This is autoimmune disease, okay? This is autoimmune disease where anti-mitochondrial antibody is very commonly found. Primary sclerosing cholangitis is one of the manifestation of ulcerative colitis, which you have studied before. So the name itself suggests it is sclerosing cholangitis. Sclerosing means fibrosis. Cholangitis is inflammation of bile duct. So bile duct is getting narrowed as well as inflamed. So definitely there will be obstruction. And another one, gallstone. Now only gallstone probably will not give rise to any jaundice, but the problem occurs when that gallstone slips out of the gallbladder and enter into the bile duct. Now it will completely block the flow of the bile and result in obstructive jaundice. And the last one is another important cause in older people. This is carcinoma of the head of the pancreas. Okay, remember the pathway of bile duct when it goes towards the duodenum, it passes from that head area of the pancreas. So if there is a big tumor which is developing there, naturally it will obstruct or give compression to the common bile duct. So this is how you remember, okay? So from the next time, if this type of question is asked, you don't need to mug up this thing. You can just remember the pathway of the bile flow and what disease can occur there. Think about it and answer. Now, with this information, let's talk about another important part, that is how to evaluate liver disease in lab, or which lab test you like to order. Now see here. The first type of test we do are these liver enzymes. These liver enzymes show whether liver cell or hepatocyte is injured or not. So these are AST, ALT, and LDH. AST, ALT, and LDH. These are the common one. These are also known as cytosolic hepatocellular enzyme because they are present inside the cytoplasm of hepatocyte. Now AST is also known as, you can tell me what is another name of AST? Yes guys?
SGOT and SGPT.
Very good, excellent. SGOT is AST, okay, and ALT is SGPT. Now the full form of this is a little bit difficult probably for you, but still let me tell you that S is serum glutamate oxaloacetate transferase. Serum glutamate oxaloacetate transferase is SGOT, and serum glutamate pyruvate transferase is SGPT. So P stands for pyruvate, O stands for oxaloacetate, also known as AST and ALT. Now both of these terms are important for you because sometimes in the exam they can simply ask SGOT, and if you don't know, you are in trouble. Another enzyme which is present inside the cell, any cells actually, is LDH. It is not specific to liver. It is present anywhere, any type of cell. Now, another type of liver function test would be biliary excretory function, and that is done by serum bilirubin. Now, bilirubin is always ordered in the form of TSB, okay, which is total serum bilirubin, and that total serum bilirubin means it is the combination of unconjugated and conjugated variety. Now, unconjugated bilirubin is known as indirect bilirubin. Okay, let me write it here for you. It is indirect bilirubin. Indirect is unconjugated. Okay, unconjugated. Okay, and another one is direct. This is conjugated. This is already written there. So total serum bilirubin is the combination of both. Now, one small practical information. When you order liver function test, you always do TSB and the direct bilirubin. And where is the indirect now? This indirect is calculated from these two. So if I subtract direct from the total, indirect will be there. Now let me give you one example here. If the total serum bilirubin is 5 and if direct is 2, indirect would be 3. 5 minus 2 equals to 3. So this is how we calculate what is the type of bilirubin there in the patient. Now, another type of liver laboratory evaluation of liver disease would be enzyme which are leaked from the damage of biliary canaliculi or biliary duct. And the important enzyme here, alkaline phosphatase. You already know this because it is high in obstructive type of jaundice or cholestatic jaundice. Another enzyme is called GGT. This is serum gamma glutamyl transpeptidase, GGT. And another one is serum 5-nucleotidase. We call it 5-NT. Okay, and out of them ALP is the most important one. So serum alkaline phosphatase, serum gamma glutamyl transpeptidase, and serum 5-nucleotidase. All of these are bound with biliary duct or biliary canaliculi. So when they are obstructed or damaged, they will be high. Now, to know how well the liver is functioning, we have to go for this type of test. What is the total serum albumin level? And what is the prothrombin time in the patient? And another one, what is the level of serum ammonia or urea? Okay, so let me say a little bit about them. Now, albumin is very important type of plasma protein. Albumin, it is synthesized by liver. Now, you already know if liver is badly damaged or chronically diseased, then serum albumin level will be low. So what is the function of serum albumin in our body? Yes?
Sir, it maintains non-profit
transport of many.
Good. One is it maintains the oncotic pressure and it acts like a transporter to many other substances. Excellent. Okay. These are the two most important functions you have already told me. Now, let's come back to the topic. If albumin is low, the oncotic pressure will be low. And we need oncotic pressure, okay, for homeostasis of the fluid. Without oncotic pressure, whatever fluid has pushed out of the capillary cannot be drawn inside the capillary again. And this is one of the major mechanisms for edema. So, if albumin is low, there will be edema. This is the answer. And another one, a lot of substances cannot be carried properly in the blood, so there will be alteration in function. Even important than serum albumin is prothrombin time. Now, this prothrombin time, okay, is prolonged because of lack of the clotting factor which are synthesized by liver. So what are those clotting factors which are synthesized by liver?
2, 7, 9, 10.
7, 9,
7, 9, 10.
7, 9.
Very good, very good, very easy question. So many students know this already. Okay, those factors are 2, isn't it? 2, 7, 9, and 10. 2, 7, 9, and 10. These are the factors which are synthesized by liver. And one very important point, vitamin K is very much required to make them active. So even without vitamin K, this factor cannot function properly, and forget about them when liver is damaged because they are not formed at all. So if these factors are less, then prothrombin time will be prolonged. Okay? The normal value is about 11 to 12 seconds. If it is longer than that, we know this factor is by the liver. Okay? Now, okay. So wait.
Irfan, kindly turn off your mic.
Let me mute for a few minutes. Then it will be all right, okay? Because it is disturbing all of us. Fine. Now what I was talking here is, what is the importance of doing prothrombin time in this case? Now this prothrombin time will signify how badly liver is damaged. How badly. If liver is badly damaged, it cannot synthesize those clotting factor, and without those clotting factor, okay, there is high chance of bleeding or hemorrhage from different parts of the body, and this is denoted by prolonged prothrombin time. Never forget this. If they give you all different types of liver function, okay, and ask you which one of them denotes the prognosis of liver disease, the answer is prothrombin time. It is such an important test. Normal value is about 11 to 12 seconds. If it is very longer than that or prolonged than that, we know it is abnormal. Another is ammonia, and this ammonia would be converted into urea. Okay, so if urea level is very low or ammonia level is high, that means liver is not functioning properly. So this is another important point. Okay, now after this, let's talk about what happens in chronic liver disease like a cirrhosis of liver. It's a perfect example. So what are the clinical features in chronic liver disease or cirrhosis of the liver? Now we have divided this into different headings. First is hepatic dysfunction and another is portal hypertension. Now because of hepatic dysfunction, jaundice and cholestasis occur. This jaundice is mainly hepatocellular jaundice or hepatic jaundice, but I already told you those small biliary duct which are present inside the liver can also be damaged in this disease, and that is called cholestatic jaundice. So both can be there. Hypoalbuminemia, because albumin is not synthesized. Hyperammonemia, because ammonia cannot be converted into urea. Ammonia will remain as a free ammonia. And this ammonia, remember, is a toxic gas. This gas can cross any barrier. It can easily go into the brain by crossing blood-brain barrier, and this condition is known as hepatic encephalopathy. Hepatic encephalopathy. So ammonia is the main culprit there. Hypoglycemia. Hypoglycemia very commonly occur in liver disease. So let me give a few points about this. Most of the metabolism of carbohydrate, okay, occurs in the liver, like glycogenesis, glycogenolysis, and gluconeogenesis. Let me write these terms for you. It will be a bit like a good revision for us. See here, you have done that probably in biochemistry, but I'm not sure about it. Glycogenesis, gluconeogenesis and gluconeogenesis. Now, I'm going to ask this question to you. What is glycogenesis?
Process of glucose synthesis.
Okay. And what is glycogenolysis?
Gases of glycogen, sir.
Good. And gluconeogenesis?
Measure of glycogen from other sources.
Okay. Okay. So you guys have certain concept of this. Very good. Okay. So listen here. Let me explain this from my side. Glycogenesis. See there, glycogen is synthesized. Glycogenesis means glycogen is synthesized from glucose. So that exactly what happens if we eat good amount of food and we have enough amount of glucose, then all that glucose will be converted into glycogen and stored inside the liver. And when we do not eat, we break down that glycogen, convert it into glucose, and then we utilize that. That process is called glycogenolysis, breakdown of glycogen. And the third one, if we do not eat for a long duration, for example, more than 24 hours, okay, you don't eat anything for more than 24 hours, you just drink water, okay, you just drink black coffee or green tea without adding sugar, nothing, or even black tea, only black tea. Now what will happen? All the glycogen which is stored in your body is over. It is over. Now the only thing left is, okay, only thing left is we have, wait 1 minute. Okay. Now what I'm talking about here is the mechanism of glycogenesis, glycogenolysis, and gluconeogenesis. Okay. So when we have enough glucose in our blood, that glucose will be converted into glycogen and is stored in the liver. When we do not eat or when we require it, it will be converted back into the glucose and we can utilize it. But when we don't eat anything for a longer duration, that is more than 24 hours, all our glycogen store is over. It is used up. Now we have to synthesize glucose from new source. This is known as gluconeogenesis. And for this purpose, we use fat. Fat will be broken now. Okay, fat will be broken. Even protein will be degraded later on, but in the beginning we utilize fat. This is how you burn fat from your body. You don't eat for a considerable time. You allow that fat to mobilize and broken down. Okay, and that's how you lose weight. This is the principle. So same can be explained here. Now let's come back to the topic. These are the normal thing what I'm talking about. So what happens in liver disease? Now in liver disease, all these mechanisms cannot occur properly. The process of glycogenesis cannot happen properly. The process of gluconeogenesis cannot happen. And probably glycogen cannot be broken down into glucose as well. That's why there is very high chance of hypoglycemia, means decreased blood sugar level. Now another sign of hepatic dysfunction would be fetor hepaticus. Now, fetor hepaticus means bad breath, okay, bad breath or foul smelling breath you can say, and this is because of the presence of some gases on our breath. One of that gases is called mercaptans. Mercaptans is the name of the gas which may be present in the breath, and the person will have bad breath or foul smelling breath. Palmar erythema and spider angioma, these are because of excessive estrogen present in the blood. Okay, because estrogen cannot be metabolized properly by the damaged liver. Now spider angioma are mainly present in the superior vena cava territory. Now how I know which is superior vena cava territory? It is present above the nipple line, means this is the vein which drains upper part of our body, that is head and neck area and the upper limb. So if you see a dilated arteriole with multiple capillaries coming out from there above the nipple, this is called spider angioma or spider nevi. This is important manifestation in cirrhosis of the liver. Hypogonadism, okay, hypogonadism occur very commonly in male, especially in male, and this is again because of excessive level of estrogen. Remember, estrogen is a female hormone and the level should not be high in male. If it remains high, it can lead a lot of problem like hypogonadism and gynecomastia as well. Now, gynecomastia is enlargement of the breast tissue in male. Enlargement of breast tissue in male, and this is also the effect of excessive estrogen. Weight loss and muscle wasting are a very important part of hepatic dysfunction in case of chronic liver disease. Now let's go and talk about portal hypertension. Now let me tell you one thing in the beginning. Why portal hypertension develop in cirrhosis of the liver? You need to clearly understand this. And many students, they don't know till now why it happens. Now let's go inside the liver. Now what happens to this portal vein inside the liver? This main portal vein will divide into two branches, left branch and the right branch, and it will go inside the liver. Now inside the liver, it will divide into different sinusoids. Okay, the sinusoids are called capillaries inside the liver. Now all these sinusoids will ultimately combine together and form venule, and this venule will even combine together to form bigger vein, and ultimately hepatic vein is formed which drains the liver. So this is a very important point here. Now what is cirrhosis? Cirrhosis means there is extensive fibrosis going on. Okay, extensive fibrosis going on inside the liver. This fibrosis will compress all these hepatic sinusoids, and as a result of this, the blood which is coming from the portal vein is blocked now. This blood cannot flow forward. Okay, so it develops back pressure and the blood remains inside this portal vein. This is known as portal hypertension because of cirrhosis. What happens to the patient because of this portal hypertension? Fluid will leak into the peritoneal cavity, which is known as ascites. The mechanism for this fluid leakage in portal hypertension is increased hydrostatic pressure. Don't forget that. But at the same time, portal hypertension is caused by cirrhosis, and cirrhosis is leading to decreased oncotic pressure as well. So this ascites is the combination of both increased hydrostatic pressure because of portal hypertension and decreased oncotic pressure because of cirrhosis of the liver. Now why splenomegaly occurs? Okay, why splenomegaly occurs in case of portal hypertension? Who can tell me that?
Because liver cannot drain it and it
superior
will accumulate in the
mesenteric
liver.
vein from the portal vein, and due to back pressure of the blood, splenomegaly occurs.
Okay, yes, Irfan is answering in a very good way. So other students also know this. This answer is not difficult at all, because just know what is the venous drainage of the spleen. Your answer is there. And regarding the venous drainage of the spleen, it is drained by splenic vein. Splenic vein will combine with superior mesenteric vein to form portal vein. Now see there, what is happening? This portal vein is having obstruction. Okay, there is development of back pressure, so the blood from the spleen cannot flow in the forward direction. So all the blood will be accumulated there. This is known as congestion of the spleen, and the spleen can become really big, massive splenomegaly. Hemorrhoid. This hemorrhoid is because of dilation of those collaterals which are present in the rectum or anal canal area. These are hemorrhoids, dilated collaterals in that area. Caput medusa is a dilated vein around the umbilicus. Okay, these are some of the important points which are highlighted here. So hepatic dysfunction sign and portal hypertension sign. Okay, now there are some life-threatening complications of chronic liver disease. In my next class, I'll repeat this again, but let's go through them now. Hepatic failure. Okay, because of the hepatic failure, multiple other organs can also be involved. One of the most important organ is kidney. If liver fails, kidney also fails. This is known as hepatorenal syndrome, which is clearly written here. Okay, coagulopathy can occur, and hepatic encephalopathy can occur. Means brain is damaged because of liver disease, and the reason is the detoxification functions of the liver cannot happen. Ammonia cannot be converted into urea. That ammonia is freely crossing the blood-brain barrier and leading the damage. Another life-threatening complication would be portal hypertension development from cirrhosis, and one of the problem of portal hypertension is formation of esophageal varices in the lower end of the esophagus. This varices can rupture anytime, and if it ruptures, there is a massive hemorrhage which can kill the patient. Another one, malignancy can also develop from cirrhosis of the liver, and this is hepatocellular carcinoma. Hepatocellular carcinoma. So these are the complications of chronic liver disease or cirrhosis.